Before you apply the buttonhole to your skirt, or the two buttonholes to your skirt, you'll need to do a couple of practice buttonholes and then show your teachers to make sure that you've got it right. This is the buttonhole foot that we have with these Bernina machines. It's got a little slide dial which helps you work out how and keep consistent your buttonhole width. If you place your button level with the first little red marker, you can measure the button, and then you need to come a little bit past the diameter of the button, so about 3 to 5 millimeters, depending on how bulky your button is. If it's really quite chunky, you need to go a bit further. So change your feet. And it's worth just trying to get your needle thread to go just to the bottom of your buttonhole foot through that tiny little hole at the start. Something I always find quite challenging, as you can see. There, we're ready to go. So what you've got to do is change your stitch length right down to like the furthest point at which it will go, and then you're supposed to go sort of 180 degrees. I usually find you need to go a little bit more than 180 degrees, so more like about 200 degrees. As you can see, the buttonhole dial changes all the other settings as it goes. So each of the stages it goes through, it adjusts the settings for the needle position, the width of the stitch, and everything except the length of the stitch. So here's our first trial buttonhole. Make sure your fabric's folded into about 4 when you're going to trial a buttonhole, because your waistband's a lot thicker than just 1 or 2 layers of fabric. As you can see, the first stage goes down the left hand side of the buttonhole, and you just keep sewing it until those 2 red markers match up. When you're ready to change positions, make sure that your needle is up. Then change to step 2, which takes you back to the start again. When you get back to the start, make sure the needle's up before you change to step 3, which seals off the end of the buttonhole. And I just kind of do this till it looks like it's got enough coverage, so side to side about 20 times. Stage 4 goes down the right hand side of your buttonhole. So again, do it until your markers match up. Needle up, and then stage 5 goes across the bottom of the buttonhole. Stage 6 does like a little back stitch down the side, just to stop it from unravelling. And we go back to 0, and we're ready to take it out. There you go, buttonhole. So to establish where you're going to put it, I always put the button sitting on the end of the waistband so it looks like, you know, nice and even on all sides. And I line my pin up with the hole on the button that's closest to the end of the waistband. That's going to be where our big red marker lines up. Line up the top edge of the waistband with the second line, just like you have been when you've been sewing seams. Try and really keep the edge of the waistband aligned with the line. That's really what you're watching, because you've got the bulk of the seam allowances trying to push your buttonhole a little bit away from the skirt. So you've got to make sure that your buttonhole is going to be parallel with the top edge of your skirt. So it's a little bit harder than it is when you did your trial. Just go through all the stages in sequence and really working hard, probably with your left hand there. You're making sure that the edge of the waistband stays on that second line. It also gets a bit tough towards the end of the waistband because it's bulky underneath. There's seam allowance under there. So sometimes you need to just coerce it into getting towards the end of the buttonhole. course, you've got 2 buttonholes to do on this skirt. It's a good idea to check with your teacher as to the position of the second buttonhole. So it's kind of in the middle of your waistband. When you're cutting the buttonholes open, a really good idea to put the pin sort of level with or just before you get to the stitching at either end of the buttonhole, because sometimes you can get a little bit wild with a very sharp seam ripper or unpicker and accidentally rip your skirt. You need to pierce a hole between the 2 rows of stitching. Make sure you've got a nice sharp seam ripper for this, and you just gently wiggle the seam ripper along so it cuts through the fabric but not the stitching. As you can see, I'm coming from either end towards the middle. I find that a little bit safer. You can also use a very, very sharp pair of scissors for this. A very fine pair of scissors. Always test that it's big enough for your button. This test is usually done at the trial stage. So your button should pass through with a little bit of effort.